Imagine that, just when you decide to seriously pursue God, suddenly everything starts falling apart. Your prayers become harder. Your mind won't settle down, and temptations you thought you'd already overcome suddenly come back. Then problems begin appearing in your path, problems you never saw coming. And slowly, a question begins to enter your mind. Could it be that God is no longer with me? But what if the truth is exactly the opposite of what you think? What if this pressure isn't proof that God has moved away from you? What if it's revealing something deeper about who you are? Something that Peter, Joseph, and Job each experienced in a different way. Today, we're not going to blame every problem on the enemy. We're going to ask a more important question. When pressure enters your life, how do you know whether you're simply going through pain or whether something inside you is being tested? Because sometimes what happens outside of you isn't the most important part of the story. What matters is what changes inside you afterward. Let's go back to Peter. It's the final night before the crucifixion. Everything still seems normal to the disciples, but Jesus knows what's about to happen in just a few hours. And he tells Peter, "Satan has asked to sift you like wheat." Just imagine hearing those words from Jesus. Peter hasn't seen his fall yet. He hasn't heard the rooster crow. He hasn't reached the moment when fear will make him deny Jesus. But Jesus already knows. And then Jesus says something that may be more important than the warning itself. "I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail." Think about that. Jesus didn't say, "Nothing bad will happen to you." He didn't say, "Satan won't be able to come near you." He said, "Your faith must not fail, because your circumstances may take something from you. But the one thing you truly cannot afford to lose is your trust in God." And Peter was about to learn that the hardest way possible. A few hours later, the same Peter who confidently said, "Even if everyone leaves you, I never will." 3 times he said, "I don't know this man." A real failure, not small, not symbolic. Peter truly failed. And perhaps the most painful part was that he probably thought everything was over. But Peter's story didn't end there. Remember that. Because before Peter ever fell, Jesus had already seen the end of Peter. Now, let's step away from Peter for a moment. Look at Joseph, a young man who had been given dreams about his future. But then what happened? His brothers turned against him. He was thrown into a pit. He was sold. He was taken to a foreign land. And eventually, even though he was innocent, he ended up in prison. If someone had seen only one of those chapters, they probably wouldn't have seen any connection between Joseph's life and his dreams. What did the pit have to do with his dream? What about the prison? What about being sold like a slave? But Joseph couldn't see what was still ahead. The story hadn't reached the point where the meaning of those events would become clear. Sometimes, you only see one piece of the story. And that's exactly where the problem begins. We usually judge the future using the information we have in the present chapter. But here's the question. Why do some things get harder just when you're trying to change? You decide to pray more seriously, and suddenly, your mind becomes even louder. You try to break an old habit, and the temptation comes back. You decide to leave the past behind, and somehow something from the past finds its way back to you. And the first thought that comes to mind is, maybe I'm going the wrong way. But a difficult path is not, by itself, proof that you're on the wrong path. When you've spent years moving in one direction, changing direction isn't always easy. Sometimes, the thing that needs to change resists before it finally becomes calm. And this is where Job enters the story. Job experienced one of the most difficult seasons recorded in Scripture because he didn't know why these things were happening to him. He only saw the result: loss, pain, silence, and unanswered questions. Job didn't know what conversation had taken place behind the scenes. He didn't know why he had been allowed to enter that season. And maybe that's what makes his story feel so close to ours, because most of the time, we don't have the full answer either. We see a closed door, a prayer that hasn't been answered, a relationship we've lost, a long season of uncertainty, and then we ask, God, if you're here, then why? But Job teaches us a difficult truth. Not seeing the reason does not mean God is absent. Now, let's go back to Peter. A few days later, the same man who had denied Jesus is standing face to face with him again. Peter was probably still carrying the weight of that night. But Jesus doesn't begin by humiliating him. He doesn't say, "See, I told you that you would fail." Instead, he asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" 3 times. Exactly the number of times Peter had denied him. It was as if Jesus didn't want Peter to define himself forever by the worst moment of his life. Peter had fallen, but his identity had not fallen with him. And maybe this is what you need to hear today. The worst moment of your life does not have to become the final definition of who you are. Maybe today, all you can see is your failure. But God sees what you will become after this season. Peter saw himself through his denial. Jesus saw him through his future. And maybe that difference changes your entire story too. So the next time you enter a difficult season, don't only ask, "Why did God allow this to happen?" Ask yourself this too. Am I defining myself only by what I am today? Because what looks like your greatest failure today may not be the final chapter of your life. Peter was not only the man who denied Jesus. Joseph was not only the boy who was thrown into a pit. Job was not only the man who lost everything. And you are not only this season of your life. If you're in a season right now that you still don't understand, you don't have to find all the answers today, just keep going. Because one day, you may look back and realize God was writing your story the entire time you thought He had forgotten you. If these words were meant for you, stay here. Maybe the next story will be about the very thing you're walking through today.